Hey everyone, so here we are, Sunday afternoon, and I'm on day 22 of my 30-day ideas challenge. So let's have a little drink to that. It is just purified water, by the way. It's quite warm here, but there is a nice cool breeze now, and it is summer after all. And it is, my birthday month. My birthday's on Valentine's Day. And, I am a sun sign Aquarius. And that kind of gives you a bit of a hint as to what I'm going to talk about. So you can probably see in the description, I was talking about some ancient wisdom and teachings that can really support your health on a whole different level. And it's interesting because my mind is being blown left and right, honestly. You guys know I've been studying astrology recently, more so from a life purpose perspective and really a business perspective too, because it can really help you, work out, I guess, what your ideal clients are in terms of niching and things like that. But it can also help really work out some of your greatest gifts here, like your soul's brilliance. It can look at, so many other elements, but that's kind of the element that I've really been studying, or that perspective, that angle that I've been studying, that I've been learning, and I've been doing readings on. Anyway, I want to talk about something, and it was interesting because, I've got all these old texts, good old, you might have heard of Nicholas Culpeper. Nicholas Culpeper was this early 17th century physician. He was known as a herbalist and also a famous astrologer. And to be honest, when I used to look at these old texts, Bev, hey, how are you? When I used to look at these old texts, I kind of, to be honest, just dismiss half of it. Like I'd look at the particular herb, whatever it might be, in this instance, dill, and I'd read the description, and they'd be talking a little bit about, what it looked like and what it was similar to, and, all that sort of thing. Anyway, I'd disregard the part where it would talk about, for instance, here, talking about dill, which I'm sure we all know dill. It tastes great with seafood, particularly fish, things like that. Here he's saying with dill, Mercury has the dominion of this plant, and therefore be sure it strengthens the brain. Now, what I know is Mercury is about communications, and I always think Mercury, okay, so rules like Gemini. Gemini is an air sign, communications, and also it corresponds and governs the brain, Mercury. So that makes sense. But I just kind of disregarded it. And it was interesting because everyone always cites, good old Hippocrates saying all disease begins in the gut. Interestingly, he was also quoted as saying, a physician without the knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself a physician, which I found interesting too. And as I said, I've been looking at it more from a life purpose perspective, business perspective, and I hadn't really even looked at the medical side of it. However, as I'm sort of studying it more and more, and I'm a Manigen and I'm a 1-3. So I'm an investigator and I love going and learning and finding all the new information, then basically, chunking it down and sharing it. That's what I love doing. So that's what I'm doing on a Sunday afternoon, as you do. Anyway, so as I'm kind of working through the information, I'm just like, oh, okay. So in one of the lectures, they were talking about, Saturn ruling the liver. I thought, okay. And it's interesting because the more I've looked into it, it kind of makes sense. So for instance, you think of, say, Aries. Aries is a fire sign. They're fast, they're intense. And then when you also think about the planet that rules Aries, it is Mars. Mars, is hot. And when you think of the conditions associated with that, inflammation, redness, swelling, things like that. And also when I started looking at, each of the houses and what they actually kind of correspond with or, rule or govern, Aries is, the head, the brain, the face. And it's interesting because even when you think of like heat rising, and as I said, they are a fire sign and they're fast. And, so when you sort of think about that, sometimes like even headaches and, that blood pressure headache, things like that, that kind of makes sense. You think, oh yeah. And then Taurus, for instance, they say corresponds or rules, the throat, the neck, the lips, and even the chakra. And, it's interesting because when you look at the different planets, so Venus rules Taurus, and that Venusian energy is kind of really like laid back. And they say that also then corresponds with the lymphatic system. And that can kind of almost shape and guide. Okay, well, if we've got to focus on that, you can then start drawing on some of the lymphatic herbs, the docs and things like that. You think, oh, interesting. So as I said, the more I kind of study, the more I'm just kind of like, wow, I hadn't even really looked at it from that perspective. And that's why I wanted to share it. And then, when I kind of started thinking back, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, when I looked at these old texts, I just disregarded that. And I guess with Hippocrates, I was always kind of thinking more, we always think of, Hippocrates is a father of Western medicine. And, for a long time, doctors used to take the Hippocratic Oath. But I never really kind of made the correlation between, I guess, him and medical astrology. So, when you actually look, like it has its roots way, way, way back when, very ancient roots in like India, China, Egypt. And then it really proliferated in Europe kind of around, they said, 1450 to 1700. That's when it was just massive. And as I said, Nicholas Culpeper was around the 1600s, I think they said. So it's just pretty, as I said, pretty phenomenal. And I don't really kind of tend to go too much in, they talk about planets that are like beneficial or negative in terms of health and things like that, because you can go down that kind of rabbit hole as well. But, even just looking at it, Gemma, hey, how are you? Just talking about medical astrology, actually. I was just sort of, talking a little bit about, some of the good old ancient, like Hippocrates and Nicholas Culpeper and people like that who, I didn't tend to make the correlation between them and their, the fact that they were also known as being amazing astrologers. And this whole body, this whole modality, this medical astrology, I've kind of really not even looked into it, and now that I am, it's just like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. And even just looking at someone's sun sign, if they, for instance, are an Aries, and I use that example because Aries, it's fast, it's the heat, it's the fire sign, so not only inflammation and things like that, but if someone's always fast and they're taking a lot of action, well, you think, okay, you've got to think about their nervous system, you've got to think about their adrenals, and that can also kind of guide and shape how you would treat someone and what you would focus on. So it's kind of really interesting, as I said, from that perspective, I'm just kind of like, oh, that makes sense. And it's not just, Megan, hey, Avril, hi. And it's not just looking at your sun sign, because you also need to look at, like, for instance, your moon sign. That's also really important and needs nourishing, but also your ascendant, so the rising sign. So as I said, for me, my rising sign is an Aries, even though my sun sign is Aquarius. So as an Aries, that's kind of how I, how others kind of see me. And I absolutely am fast, as you probably, can tell by the way I speak and move. And so same thing, I've had adrenal issues in the past. So, kind of the more depth there is in terms of like me going deep with all of this, it's just like, wow, my mind is absolutely blown. And, the more you look into it, it's interesting because also they correspond in terms of the houses, like the zodiac signs, correspond with the chakras, which, as we know, that also is, goes way, way, way back when you look at, Vedic and Ayurvedic medicine, which has been around for, centuries. And it's just phenomenal how there's so many linkages between all of them. And, how once you start kind of connecting the dots, there's this whole body of information that is so, I guess, enlightening and insightful, and can really sort of provide additional ways that you can treat someone. Because, these days, and I always talk about holistic health and wellness, that's my jam, that's what I'm passionate about. But I tend to say, when I talk about holistic health and wellness, I talk about more looking at it from, the emotional perspective, and, we got to look at the subconscious mind, and, looking at, the mental side of things in terms of, once again, our thoughts and, some of these limiting beliefs and these stories and, all the stuff that goes on. And of course, the spiritual level as well. And, when, now it's almost like this is taking on another level and layer. in terms of just being able to really look at someone's natal chart, which is their blueprint. It is so unique to them. And that's what I love about it, because, you know, at the end of the day, there is 40,000 something diets out there. And that's worked for that person that came up with it. And maybe it's worked for a few others, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It's not taking into account your bio-individuality. It's not taking into account your genetic makeup. It's not taking into account your lifestyle, anything like that, your life stage, where this is your blueprint. So once we run your natal chart, you know, then we can sort of work out, okay, so this is your rising sign. This is where the moon is. This is where Pluto is. This is where Saturn is. This is where Venus is. And, you know, it can just show you so much. So as I said, my mind's just blown. Like, here I am just, you know, going through all the information and, you know, suddenly thinking, oh, yeah, okay, like I really should go back to some of these texts and actually look at what some of these, you know, as I just really consider them as herbalists and things like that. But yeah, they were famous astrologers and they really kind of drew on it a lot for their treatment protocols. So anyway, that was the key thing that I wanted to talk about. It was just, you know, I found it, as I said, really interesting because I've really been looking at astrology, as I said, from a business perspective, a life purpose perspective, looking at your niche, looking at your gifts and all that sort of stuff, your soul's brilliance, but not really looking at it from a medical astrology point of view. And it is just a phenomenal kind of modality when you really start delving into it. And really even just knowing, as I said, your sun sign can give you additional insights. And then, of course, you know, you can also look at where your moon is and your rising, your ascendant. That's also going to help you in piecing it all together. You know, so yeah, because I mean, the moon, for starters, you know, is kind of feminine. It's also to do with emotions. So that definitely needs to be taken into account, as I said, because, you know, certain signs like water signs can be more emotional, but then you've also got, for instance, air signs like Aquarius that can be a little cold and detached and not really express their emotions. And same with some of the earth signs like Taurus, you know, they can kind of not be great at expressing their emotions. So that can also impact your health. So anyway, I will love you and leave you. I will see you tomorrow. And yeah, I don't have many days left, do I? 8 days or something. And yeah, anyway, have a great weekend and see you soon.